The information needed to describe everything that ever fell into a black hole does not fill its volume. It fits exactly on its surface. When physicists first realized this, it cracked open a possibility that sounds insane. That this universe and you, sitting there watching this, might really be a projection. A three-dimensional image, lifted out of information written on a distant, flat, two-dimensional surface. I was a quantum mechanics researcher. I am not here to sell you a fantasy, and I am not going to ask you to believe anything on faith. I am going to walk you through the actual physics, one careful step at a time, the same physics that made serious, sober scientists take this idea seriously. And then, at the very end, I am going to tell you what I think the original behind the projection is. Because in my model, that is the part that quietly changes how your entire reality gets built. To understand why anyone would say something as strange as the universe is a hologram, you have to start where the idea was actually born, not in a meditation retreat, at the edge of a black hole. Here is the puzzle that genuinely kept physicists awake at night. In physics, there is an almost sacred rule. Information is never truly destroyed. You can burn a book, and in principle, if you tracked every particle of smoke and ash, the information about that book is still there, scrambled but preserved. Nothing is ever fully erased. But the black hole seems to break that rule. You drop something in a book, a planet, a person, and it is gone. Past the horizon, no signal comes back. And when Stephen Hawking showed that black holes slowly evaporate, the question turned into a crisis. If the black hole disappears, where did all that information go? This became known as the black hole information paradox. Trying to solve it, Jacob Bekenstein and Stephen Hawking found something that should stop you in your tracks. They worked out how much information a black hole can actually hold. And it does not scale with the volume inside it. It scales with the surface area of its horizon, with the two-dimensional boundary. Sit with how wrong that feels. If I ask how much you can fit in a room, you think about the space inside the volume. But a black hole's entire contents are accounted for by its surface. Roughly 1 bit of information for every tiny square patch of the horizon, each about the size of a single Planck area, the smallest meaningful length in physics. So, here was the first clue, staring physicists in the face. A three-dimensional interior, completely and exactly described by a two-dimensional boundary, nothing missing. And once you have seen that pattern for a black hole, there is an obvious, dangerous question you cannot unask. Why would it stop at black holes? That is precisely the question two physicists, Gerard Hooft, a Nobel laureate, and Leonard Susskind, one of the founders of string theory, decided to take seriously. And out of it came what we now call the holographic principle. The claim is bold and simple. The full physics of any region of space, everything happening inside it, can be completely encoded as information on its boundary surface. The interior is not the fundamental thing. The surface is, the volume is the story. The surface is the page it is written on. The name comes from an ordinary hologram. You take a flat piece of film, two-dimensional, and you record an interference pattern on it. Shine light through, and a full three-dimensional image floats up into the air. The information is flat. The image has depth. The depth is real to your eyes, but it was never where the information lived. So, the holographic principle asks the vertigo-inducing question. What if the whole universe works like that film? What if everything you experience as three-dimensional, solid, deep, out there in front of you is the floating image, and the actual information is written on a surface you will never directly see? Now, the moment an idea gets this strange, a physicist's first job is to doubt it. A poetic metaphor is not science. So let me show you the exact moment this stopped being a metaphor and became real mathematics. In 1997, a physicist named Juan Maldacena published a result that reshaped theoretical physics. He found a precise, fully worked case where a theory of gravity inside a certain kind of space is exactly equivalent to a quantum theory living on the boundary of that space, a theory with no gravity in it at all. I need you to feel the weight of the word exactly, not similar to, not a useful analogy for, equivalent. Every question you can ask about the inside, with all its gravity, its curvature, its extra dimension of space, has a precise matching answer in the calculations on the lower dimensional boundary. It is as if you had two completely different looking descriptions of the same thing and they never disagree. A hard problem about gravity in the interior becomes a different problem on the surface, and you can translate perfectly back and forth. Physicists have used this dictionary for over 20 years now. It works. And this is why holography is not fringe. This is why it sits at the center of serious physics. Because in Maldacena's case, the interior, the volume, the gravity, even space itself behaves as though it emerges out of information sitting on a surface of fewer dimensions. Space stops looking like the bottom floor of reality. Information starts looking like the bottom floor. But you should still be resisting. Beautiful math is one thing. So here is the honest, harder question. Is there any sign that our universe, the real one, the one you woke up in, actually behaves this way? Around 2017, a group of researchers put it to a real test. They took the oldest light in existence, the cosmic microwave background, the faint afterglow still arriving from the infant universe, and they asked whether a fundamentally holographic model of the early universe could reproduce the fine patterns we actually measure in that light. And what they reported was striking. The holographic model fit the data about, as well as the standard model of cosmology does. Now, I have to be very careful here, because this is exactly the kind of place where people overclaim. That is not proof. It did not overturn the standard picture, but it shows something that is not small. A universe that is holographic at its root is not ruled out by what we observe. It is consistent with the sky. So let me gather the whole thread before we take the turn, because the steps matter. A black hole stores its interior on its surface. The holographic principle extends that to space itself. Maldacena's work gives an exact working case where the insight emerges from boundary information, and observation, so far, does not contradict it. Underneath every one of those steps is the same quiet sentence. At its root, reality may be information, not matter. And if that is even partly true, it should change how you feel the word solid. Right now, this looks solid, but physics already tells you the atoms in your hand are almost entirely empty space. Holography pushes that further. The solidity, the depth, the three-dimensional there-ness of everything around you may be the rendering, the image lifted off the page. Now here is the 10. And from this point on, I am going to be completely honest with you about what changes. This is no longer settled physics. From here, this is my model, my interpretation. I will keep the line clear. Because if a three-dimensional reality is the projection of two-dimensional information, then a projection always comes with two more things. It has a source, the original, where the information is actually written, and it has the act of projection, whatever lifts that information up into an image you can stand inside. And the screen, the image itself, is never the original. You cannot find the film by examining the picture on the wall, which forces a question the physics alone does not answer. What selects the information? Out of all the possibilities that could be written, what decides which version gets lifted into the solid, specific now that you are living in this exact second? And this is where holography brushes up against something I've talked about before, the observer effect. In quantum experiments, the act of observation is bound up with which possibility becomes real. The observer is not a passive spectator standing outside the glass. Attention is somehow part of how a single reality gets selected out of many. So, in my model, put those two ideas together and a picture forms. Your inner information, your beliefs, your self-image, the emotional state you hold steady hour after hour is part of the original, part of what gets projected as your reality. The information space is where it is written. The world you walk through is the image lifted from it. And if that is true, it quietly rewrites what manifestation even is. It is not pushing on the outer image with brute force. It is not gripping the screen and trying to rub the picture into a different shape with sheer effort. It is this: change the source, and the image follows. Swap the film, and the projection changes on its own, without your forcing the wall. Watch where almost everyone burns themselves out. They try to change the outcome the screen directly. They strain at the external result, the number in the bank, the person, the circumstance, while the original is left completely untouched. And so the picture keeps snapping back to what the film still says. You cannot edit a projection by scratching the wall it lands on. Here is what that looks like in a real life. Two people want the same change. The first fixes their eyes on the outer result and forces, grips, panics every time the screen does not move. The first is scratching the wall. The second quietly changes what they hold as true about themselves, the source, and lets the outer image catch up. In my model, it is the second who is actually working with how reality is built, not against it. And notice, this does not ask you to deny the physics or pretend the world is not real. The image of a hologram is genuinely there. Your reality is genuinely there. The claim is only about which layer is upstream, about what is the original and what is the projection that follows it. So the black hole surface and the holographic principle and Maldacena's dictionary and the observer effect, they are all saying the same thing from different directions. The root is information. And you are not standing outside that information, watching it from a safe distance. You are touching it. You are part of the original it is written from, which is why I want to leave you with one line, not as a slogan to repeat mindlessly, as a way of standing inside your own reality, a reminder of which layer you actually live on. I am not the projection, I am the information it is projected from. I change the source and the image follows. Say it slowly once more, like you mean it. I am not the projection. I am the information it is projected from. I change the source and the image follows. And if that landed somewhere really new, write it in the comments, put it in your own words, make it your own declaration. I read them, and there is something that happens when a lot of people hold the same line at the same time. One last thread, because it points exactly to where we go next. If the universe is a projection of information, how many dimensions is that information actually written across? Your everyday world feels like 3. But the physics behind holography quietly needs far more than 3. Next time, I am going to take you into the 11 dimensions that string theory describes what they are, why the math seems to demand them, and what I believe lives in the higher ones. If today bent how solid the world feels, the next one will bend where you think you are standing. I will see you there.